The taxi slowed as we turned onto the narrow street, the one I used to know by heart. I hadn't seen it in months, but every crack in the pavement, every crooked mailbox, still felt familiar. Or maybe I just wanted it to. I tightened my grip on the cane resting against my knee. My hands still didn't listen to me the way they used to. The doctors said it would improve.
They always said that.
Improvement, progress, recovery. Words that sounded hopeful, but felt empty when your body refused to cooperate. "You sure this is it?" the driver asked, glancing at me in the rearview mirror. I nodded slowly. Yes, this is my daughter's house. Even saying it felt strange now. The car stopped. I stared out the window, trying to prepare myself. I had imagined this moment so many times during those long hospital nights. My daughter opening the door, rushing toward me, maybe crying, maybe laughing, relieved that I was alive. Instead, what I saw made my chest tighten. There were bags, not suitcases, trash bags, black plastic, tied at the top, sitting on the sidewalk like discarded things no one wanted anymore. My things. I didn't move right away. I just stared, hoping, ridiculously, that I was mistaken, that maybe they belonged to someone else. But then I saw it. The red scarf. The one I had worn every winter for the past 10 years. It was half hanging out of one of the bags, fluttering slightly in the breeze. "Ma'am," the driver said gently. "Do you want me to wait?" I swallowed. My throat felt dry.
No.
I need a moment. He nodded but didn't drive away. I opened the door slowly. The movement alone made my body protest. 3 months in a hospital bed had turned even simple actions into challenges. When my feet touched the ground, I nearly lost my balance. The driver was there instantly, steadying me.
"Easy."
"Thank you," I whispered. I leaned on my cane and took a step forward. Then another. Each step felt heavier than the last. The closer I got, the clearer it became. It wasn't just bags. My life was scattered across the pavement. Clothes, shoes, books, even a small wooden box I kept by my bedside. It had fallen open, and its contents, old photographs, were spilling out onto the concrete. I bent down slowly, painfully, and picked one up. It was a picture of my daughter, Olivia, when she was 8. Missing front teeth, hair tied in uneven pigtails, smiling like the world belonged to her. My vision blurred. The front door opened. I froze.
"Finally," she said.
Her voice was sharp,
Flat.
unfamiliar. I looked up. Olivia stood in the doorway, arms crossed. Perfect hair, perfect clothes, perfect control. She looked exactly the same, and completely different. "I was wondering when you'd show up," she added. I tried to smile. It felt wrong on my face. I just got discharged this morning." She didn't move, didn't step forward, didn't ask how I was. Instead, she gestured toward the bags. "Your stuff is there." My heart skipped. "My things." "I packed everything," she said. "You can take it." Something cold spread through my chest. "I don't understand," I said quietly. She let out a sigh, like I was the one being difficult. "I can't do this anymore, Mom." The words landed harder than anything the doctors had told me. "I have my own life," she continued. "My own responsibilities. I can't take care of you." "I'm not asking you to take care of me," I said, though even as I spoke, I knew it wasn't entirely true. "You will need care," she replied immediately. "Therapy, medication, supervision. I don't have time for that." The driver shifted behind me, still close enough to catch me if I fell. "Olivia," I said softly. "I almost died. And I'm sorry for that," she said quickly. "I really am. But that doesn't change anything." The street felt too quiet, like the whole world was holding its breath. "Where am I supposed to go?" I asked. She shrugged. Actually shrugged. I don't know. A facility? A motel? You'll figure it out.
I ser det her.
At the girl I had raised. The girl I had worked 3 jobs for. The girl whose dreams had become my entire life. I came home, I said, barely above a whisper. She shook her head. No, she replied. You came back. And then she stepped inside. The door closed. The sound echoed in my chest like something breaking. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. The driver placed a hand on my shoulder. Ma'am, you shouldn't stay out here. I nodded slowly, but I didn't move. I just stood there, surrounded by pieces of a life that no longer existed. 3 months. 3 months in a hospital bed. 3 months believing that when I came back, I would still have a place. I let out a shaky breath. Can you help me gather these? I asked. Of course, he said. We worked in silence. He picked up the heavier bags. I focused on the smaller things. The photographs. The scarf. A book I had never finished reading. Each item felt heavier than it should have. Not because of the weight, because of what it meant. When we were done, he opened the taxi door for me. Where to? He asked. I hesitated. For the first time in decades, I didn't have an answer. I looked back at the house. The curtains were drawn. No movement. No sign that I had ever mattered there. Anywhere with a vacancy, I said finally. He nodded. As the car pulled away, I felt something shift inside me. It wasn't grief. Not yet. It was something quieter. Something sharper. A realization. The daughter I had built my entire life around
Was gone.
Or maybe she had never really been there at all. I leaned my head against the window, watching the house disappear from view. And for the first time since I woke up in that hospital bed, I stopped waiting for someone to come save me. The motel room smelled faintly of detergent and something older, something that had settled into the walls long before I arrived. I sat on the edge of the bed, my cane leaning against the nightstand, and tried to understand how my life had narrowed down to this single space, for walls, a humming air conditioner, and a plastic key card that barely worked. Just a few hours earlier, I had been standing in front of what I still thought of as home. Now I was here, surrounded by bags that held everything I had left. I didn't unpack right away. I just sat there, hands resting on my knees, staring at the carpet. It had a pattern meant to hide stains, but I could still see them if I looked long enough. Funny how things reveal themselves when you stop rushing. The same had been true in the hospital. When you lie still long enough, when you have nothing but time and silence, you begin to see things you ignored before. 3 months. 92 days, to be exact. I had counted them at first, marking time by the rhythm of medication schedules and visiting hours that never mattered for me. The ICU had its own kind of silence. Not quiet, not really, but controlled. Machines beeped, nurses moved quickly, voices stayed low. Life and death passed through those halls like regular visitors. And me? I was just another body in a bed, waiting to see which direction I would go. The stroke had come without warning. One moment I was standing in the kitchen, slicing fruit for Olivia's children, and the next I was on the floor, unable to move half my body. I remember the cold tiles against my cheek, the smell of oranges, the sound of a chair falling somewhere behind me. I tried to call out, but my voice didn't cooperate. Minutes stretched endlessly. When Olivia finally found me, she didn't scream. She didn't rush to my side. She just stood there, staring, as if I had spilled something inconvenient on the floor. "Mom, what happened?" she had asked. Not, "Are you okay?" Not, "I'm here." Just confusion. Mild irritation. The ambulance came quickly after that. Strangers moved around me, lifting, checking, speaking in terms I couldn't follow. I remember holding on to one thought as everything blurred. She'll come to the hospital. She'll sit beside me. She'll hold my hand. She didn't. The first few days, I made excuses for her. She had children, a husband, responsibilities. Maybe she couldn't find childcare. Maybe she was overwhelmed. I told the nurses she'd be there soon. I smiled when I said it, as if I believed it completely. By the second week, the nurses stopped asking. By the third, they stopped mentioning family at all. Instead, they filled the silence themselves. A nurse named Carla would linger a little longer when she checked my vitals. A young orderly once brought me an extra blanket without being asked. Small kindnesses, quiet gestures, the kind you notice more when they're all you have. Rehabilitation was worse than the stroke itself. At least the stroke had been quick. Recovery was slow, humiliating, relentless. Learning to stand again felt like trying to negotiate with a body that no longer recognized me. My left leg dragged. My hand trembled. Buttons became enemies. Pens felt foreign. Even holding a spoon required concentration. "You're making progress, Victoria," my therapist would say. Progress. Such a polite word for struggle. Sometimes, during those sessions, I would catch myself imagining Olivia walking through the door, watching me take those shaky steps, telling me she was proud. It never happened, but the image stayed, like a stubborn echo. One afternoon, a social worker came to speak with me. Her name was Denise. She had kind eyes, but a tired expression, the kind that comes from seeing too many situations like mine. "We need to discuss your discharge plan," she said, sitting beside my bed with a folder in her hands. "Do you have somewhere safe to go?" "Yes," I answered immediately. "My daughter's house." The lie came easily. Not because I wanted to deceive her, but because I wasn't ready to face the alternative. Denise nodded, writing something down. "And she's able to assist you? You'll need some help at first." "Of course," I said. I remember the way her pen paused for just a second before continuing. Maybe she didn't believe me. Maybe she had seen this before, patients clinging to people who had already let them go. The night before my discharge, I didn't sleep. The hospital room felt different, as if it already knew I was leaving. The machines seemed louder, the shadows longer. I stared at the ceiling and replayed my life, piece by piece, like I was trying to find the moment where everything had shifted. When Olivia was 6, her father left. No warning, no explanation that made sense. Just a note and an empty closet. I remember sitting at the kitchen table, holding that piece of paper, while Olivia colored beside me, completely unaware that her world had just changed forever. From that moment on, it was just the two of us. I worked wherever I could, cleaning offices, stocking shelves, taking on extra shifts no one else wanted. Nights blurred into mornings. Sleep became optional. But Olivia never went without. She had school supplies, birthday presents, warm clothes in winter. I made sure of it. When she wanted to go to university, I didn't hesitate. I sold what I could, borrowed what I had to, and told myself it was worth it. Her future mattered more than my comfort, more than my security. And for a long time, I believed that was what love looked like. Sacrifice, endurance, giving until there was nothing left to give. Somewhere along the way, I stopped existing as a person and became a resource, a solution, someone who filled gaps. By the time Olivia had children of her own, I had already learned my role. I stepped in without being asked. Babysitting turned into daily care. Helping turned into living there. My name shifted from mom to "can you just" and "I need you to." I didn't question it, because I thought that was what family meant. Now, sitting in that motel room, I finally allowed myself to ask a question I had avoided for years. What did it mean to them? I stood up slowly and began to unpack one of the bags. Clothes first, then the small wooden box. I opened it carefully, running my fingers over the photographs inside. Olivia as a child. Olivia at graduation. Olivia holding her first baby. So many moments I had held on to as proof of something. But proof of what? Love? Or just time passing? My phone sat on the table.
Silent.
No messages. No missed calls. Not even a simple, "Did you make it somewhere safe?" I let out a long breath and closed the box. That was the moment something inside me shifted. Not loudly, not dramatically, but quietly, like a door closing in a distant room. I had spent months in a hospital waiting for someone who never came. I had spent years building a life around someone who didn't see me. And now, for the first time, there was nothing left to wait for. I walked to the window and pulled the curtain aside. The view was unremarkable. Parking lot, flickering sign, a vending machine glowing in the corner. But it was mine, at least for the night. Freedom doesn't always feel like relief at first. Sometimes it feels like emptiness, like standing in a place where something used to be and realizing it's gone for good. I rested my hand against the glass. "I'm still here," I whispered. It wasn't a declaration.
Not yet.
Just a fact. But for the first time in a very long time, it felt like it might be enough. The second morning in the motel began with a dull ache behind my eyes and the kind of silence that presses in on you before you're fully awake. For a moment, I didn't remember where I was. I reached instinctively toward the right side of the bed, expecting the familiar wall from Olivia's spare room, the faint sounds of the house waking up, coffee brewing, children arguing over cereal, footsteps overhead. But there was nothing. Just empty space and the low hum of the air conditioner. Reality returned slowly, like a tide creeping in. The sidewalk. The bags. The door closing. I sat up carefully, waiting for the dizziness to pass. My body still felt unreliable, like it might betray me at any moment. The doctors had warned me about that: fatigue, imbalance, sudden weakness. "Listen to your body," they had said. I almost laughed at that. My body had stopped listening to me months ago. I swung my legs over the side of the bed and reached for my cane. Even that small action required focus. It was strange how something as simple as standing had become an act of intention. Before, I had moved without thinking. Now, every step felt like a decision. The motel offered a continental breakfast, which turned out to be stale bread, weak coffee, and a bowl of fruit that had seen better days. I took a banana and sat alone at one of the small tables. A couple argued quietly in the corner. A man in a work uniform scrolled through his phone. No one looked at me. No one knew me. There was something oddly comforting about that.
No expectations.
No roles to play. Just existence. After breakfast, I returned to my room and sat at the small table by the window. My purse lay in front of me. For the first time since leaving the hospital, I decided to face something I had been avoiding. Money. It felt practical, necessary, grounding. If I was going to survive on my own, I needed to know what I had. I pulled out my checkbook and flipped it open. The last balance I remembered writing down was just under $8,000. Not a fortune, but enough to manage for a while if I was careful. I reached for my phone and dialed the bank. The automated voice felt painfully cheerful. I navigated the options slowly, my patience thinning with each prompt. Eventually, a real person answered. "Thank you for calling. How can I assist you today?" "Yes," I said, steadying my voice. "I'd like to check my account balance." "Of course, ma'am. Can you verify your identity?" I answered her questions, each one making me more aware of how fragile identity really is. A name, a date of birth, a few numbers, and suddenly you exist in their system. "Thank you, Mrs. Victoria," she corrected herself. "One moment while I pull up your account." I waited. There was a pause. Then, Your current balance is $412. I didn't react at first. I thought maybe I had misheard. I'm sorry, I said slowly. Can you repeat that? $412, ma'am. The room felt smaller. That's not possible, I said. There should be several thousand in that account. I do see multiple withdrawals over the past 3 months, she replied. They were authorized transactions. Authorized? I repeated. By who? There was a brief hesitation. By your listed power of attorney. My grip tightened on the phone. My what? Your power of attorney, ma'am. Olivia has been acting on your behalf. The name hit me like something physical. I never signed a power of attorney, I said. According to our records, the documentation was submitted and notarized shortly after your hospital admission. I closed my eyes. Hospital admission. While I was lying in a bed, unable to move, unable to speak clearly, unable to even feed myself, paperwork had been filed. Money had been withdrawn. How much? I asked quietly. Another pause. Longer this time. Approximately $7,600 over the past 3 months. The number echoed in my head, not just the amount, but the time. While I was in the ICU, while I was learning to walk again, while I was waiting for her to visit. Thank you, I said, though I didn't feel grateful for anything. I ended the call and sat there, staring at nothing. There's a particular kind of pain that doesn't come from loss, but from realization, from seeing something clearly for the first time when you had spent years refusing to. This wasn't neglect. This wasn't distance. This was something else entirely. I leaned back in the chair, my heart beating harder than it should have. The room felt too quiet again, but this time the silence wasn't empty. It was loud. Every memory I had of Olivia began to rearrange itself. Moments I had dismissed, comments I had ignored, conversations I had explained away. They all shifted, forming a pattern I could no longer deny. This hadn't started with the stroke. It had started long before. The stroke had just made it easier. I stood up slowly and began pacing the room, one careful step at a time. My body protested, but I ignored it. My mind was moving faster than my legs could keep up. Power of attorney. Notarized.
Filed.
Withdrawals. That wasn't panic. That wasn't desperation. That was planning. The thought settled heavily in my chest. She hadn't just reacted to my illness. She had prepared for it. I stopped near the window and pressed my hand against the glass again. Outside, nothing had changed. Cars came and went. People moved through their lives as if the world hadn't just tilted, but mine had. I turned back to the table and opened my purse again, this time with more purpose. There were things Olivia knew about, my checking account, my daily expenses. And then there were things she didn't. My father had always been cautious. Quietly so. He never trusted systems completely. Never keep everything in one place, he used to say. And never tell anyone everything you have. At the time, I had thought he was being overly careful. Now I understood. There was another account, one I hadn't touched in years. I had almost forgotten about it myself. Almost. I searched through my bag until I found an old envelope, folded and worn. Inside was a card with the name of a bank I hadn't visited in decades. My hands trembled, not from weakness this time, but from something else. Possibility. The next hour felt longer than the 3 months in the hospital. I got dressed carefully, choosing clothes that still fit properly, that made me feel at least somewhat like myself. I brushed my hair, steadied my breathing, and called for a taxi. When it arrived, the driver didn't ask questions. I was grateful for that. The bank was smaller than I remembered. Or maybe I had just grown used to larger spaces filled with noise and expectation. This place felt contained, quiet, almost forgotten. Inside, The air smelled faintly of paper and polish. A woman at the desk looked up and smiled. "Good morning. How can I help you?" "I have an account here," I said. "Or, at least, I used to." She nodded and guided me through the process. Verification. Identification. Waiting. More waiting. Then she looked at the screen, and her expression changed. Not alarmed. Not concerned. Just surprised. "One moment," she said, standing up. "I'll get the manager." I felt my heart start to race again, this time for a different reason. A few minutes later, another woman approached. Older.
Composed.
Observant. "Victoria," she said warmly. "It's been a long time." I nodded slowly. "Yes, that has." She gestured for me to sit. "I've reviewed your account," she said. "Everything appears to be intact." My breath caught. "Your balance is just over $200,000. For a second, I thought I had imagined it. 200? Yes, she confirmed gently. The account has been accruing interest for many years. There have been no recent withdrawals.
No withdrawals. No interference. No Olivia.
Something inside me shifted again, but this time, it wasn't cold. It was steady, grounded.
Real.
For the first time since I stood on that sidewalk, I wasn't looking at what I had lost. I was looking at what remained, and more importantly, at what was still mine. I sat there, letting the numbers settle into something I could understand. Not just money, not just security. Freedom, real freedom, not the kind you imagine, the kind you can choose. I looked up at the manager. "I think," I said slowly, "I'm going to need some help." And for the first time in a very long time, I wasn't asking someone who would take for me. I was choosing where to go next. I left the bank with something I hadn't felt in years. Not relief, not exactly, but stability. The kind that settles somewhere deep inside your chest and stays there, quiet but firm. The air outside felt different, sharper somehow, like I was noticing details I had ignored before. The sound of traffic, the rhythm of footsteps, even the way the wind moved through the street, it all felt more real, more immediate. For months, maybe even years, I had been living in a kind of fog. Now, for the first time, things were clear. The taxi ride back to the motel was silent, but it wasn't the same silence as before. Earlier, it had been filled with uncertainty. Now it was filled with thought. Not panic. Not confusion. Thought. I replayed everything the bank manager had said. $200,000. Untouched. Safe.
Mine.
The word echoed in my head again and again mine. It felt unfamiliar, almost uncomfortable. I had spent so long sharing, giving, offering, sacrificing, that ownership itself felt like something I needed to relearn. When I got back to the motel, I didn't go straight to my room. I stood outside for a moment, leaning lightly on my cane, watching people come and go. A young mother carrying a toddler. A man dragging a suitcase behind him. A couple arguing quietly near the vending machine. Everyone had somewhere to be. Somewhere to return to. I realized that for the first time in my life, I didn't have a predefined place waiting for me, and instead of feeling lost, I felt open. Inside my room, I closed the door and sat down at the small table again. The same table where, just hours earlier, I had discovered that my checking account had been drained. It was strange how quickly circumstances could shift. In the morning, I had felt helpless. By afternoon, I had options. But options require decisions. And decisions require something I hadn't used in a long time: my own judgment. For years, every major choice I made had been shaped by Olivia. Where I lived, how I spent my time, what I prioritized, even how I thought about myself. I had adjusted constantly, quietly, until there was almost nothing left that belonged solely to me. Now, sitting alone in that motel room, I realized I didn't even know what I wanted. So I started with something simple: safety, then comfort, then independence. The words felt basic, but they carried weight. I repeated them in my mind like instructions.
Safety.
Comfort, independence, not sacrifice, not obligation, not what would make someone else's life easier.
Meaning.
I reached for the phone again, this time with intention. The bank manager had given me the contact information for a lawyer, someone who specialized in cases like mine. At the time, I had only half listened, still processing everything. Now, her words came back, clearly. You should speak to someone who can protect you, she had said. What happened to you isn't just unfortunate, it may be illegal. Illegal? The word had unsettled me then. Now it steadied me. I dialed the number. A receptionist answered, her voice professional but not cold. Law office. How may I assist you? My name is Victoria, I said. I was given your number by the bank. I believe I may need legal advice. There was a brief pause, then a shift in tone, more attentive, more focused. Of course. We can schedule a consultation. Is this urgent? I thought about it. 3 months in the hospital. Money taken. Documents signed without my knowledge.
Yes.
It is, I said. They gave me an appointment for the next day. When I hung up, I expected to feel nervous. Instead, I felt something else. Prepared. That evening, I didn't sit in silence like the night before. I organized my things. Slowly, carefully, but with purpose. I sorted through documents, receipts, anything that might matter. My movements were still deliberate, still slower than they used to be, but they were steady. Each action felt like a step forward, not just physically, but mentally. For the first time since leaving the hospital, I wasn't reacting. I was planning. The next morning, I woke up before my alarm. The light coming through the thin curtains was pale, but enough to signal the start of something new. I dressed more carefully than usual, choosing clothes that made me feel composed, not just comfortable. It mattered. Not for appearance, but for how I carried myself. The law office was located in a quiet building, the kind you might walk past without noticing. Inside, everything was orderly,
Calm.
controlled. It reminded me, in a strange way, of the hospital, but without the tension. A woman greeted me in the waiting area. She was older, with sharp eyes and a calm expression that suggested she missed very little. Victoria, she asked. I nodded. I'm Margaret, she said.
Come in.
Her office was simple, but precise.
No clutter.
Everything in its place. She gestured for me to sit, and I did, lowering myself carefully into the chair. Tell me what happened, she said.
So I did.
I told her everything. The stroke, the hospital, the silence, the return home, the bags on the sidewalk, the closed door, the bank call, the missing money, the power of attorney I had never signed. She didn't interrupt, didn't react visibly, just listened. But I could see it in her eyes, the focus sharpening, the pieces connecting. When I finished, there was a brief silence. Then she leaned forward slightly. What you're describing, she said, is very serious. I held her gaze. I thought so. If you did not knowingly and willingly grant power of attorney, she continued, then any actions taken under that authority could be considered fraudulent. The word landed clearly this time, not unsettling.
Clarifying.
And the money? I asked. If it was taken without valid authorization, she said, it can potentially be recovered. Recovered. Another word that felt almost too hopeful. There's more, she added, reaching for a notepad. We'll need to investigate how that document was created. Who notarized it?
When?
Under what conditions? If you were incapacitated at the time, that changes everything. I felt a slow, steady anger begin to form, not explosive, not overwhelming, but controlled, directed. She planned this, I said quietly. Margaret didn't respond immediately, but her silence confirmed something. This wasn't just a misunderstanding. It wasn't just a mistake. It was deliberate. We'll start by gathering all relevant documentation, she said finally. Bank records, medical records, signatures. From there, we can determine the best course of action. I nodded. There was no hesitation anymore.
No second-guessing.
Do it, I said. She gave a small, approving nod. As I left the office, I felt different again. Not lighter, not happier, stronger. Not because the situation had improved, but because I had changed my position within it. I was no longer the person things were happening to. I was the person responding. Back at the motel, I sat by the window once more. The same view, the same parking lot, the same flickering sign. But I wasn't the same person who had stood there 2 days ago, unsure of where to go. I had a plan. I had resources. And for the first time in a very long time, I had boundaries. I rested my hand on the glass again. But this time it wasn't to steady myself. It was to ground myself. I'm not done, I said quietly. And I believed it. The weeks that followed moved faster than anything I had experienced in years, yet at the same time, every moment felt deliberate, measured, and significant. It was as if my life had shifted into a different rhythm, no longer dictated by someone else's needs, but by decisions I was finally making for myself. Each morning I woke up in that same modest motel room, but it no longer felt like a place of exile. It felt like a temporary base, a place between what had been taken from me and what I was beginning to rebuild. Margaret worked quickly. That was the first thing I noticed. She didn't waste words, didn't offer empty reassurances, and didn't treat me like someone fragile. She treated me like a client, capable, aware, and deserving of clarity. Within days, she had gathered documents I didn't even know existed. Bank records, timestamps, notarization details, medical reports. The story they told was not just painful, it was precise. The power of attorney had been filed 10 days after my hospital admission. At that time, according to my medical records, I was heavily sedated and unable to make legal decisions. The signature on the document looked like mine at first glance, but under closer inspection, it was inconsistent, too steady in places where my hand now trembled, too deliberate where my natural writing had always been fluid. Even I could see it once it was pointed out. She didn't just take advantage of the situation, Margaret said during one of our meetings. She constructed it. Those words stayed with me. Constructed. It meant intention, planning, forethought. It meant that what happened to me wasn't a moment of weakness on her part. It was a decision. The withdrawals followed a pattern. Not random, not desperate. Calculated. Enough to reduce the account significantly, but not so much at once that it would immediately raise alarms. It would have worked, too. If I had returned home quietly, if I had accepted whatever explanation she offered, if I had continued to trust her without question, none of this would have come to light. That realization didn't make me feel foolish. It made me feel awake. Margaret filed the initial legal challenge within the first week. The response came quickly. Olivia had retained a lawyer. I wasn't surprised. What had surprised me was how predictable her reaction was. Not remorse, not apology, defense, justification. She claims the funds were used for your care, Margaret told me, reviewing the documents across her desk. My care? I repeated.
Yes.
She's presenting it as necessary expenses. I let out a slow breath. She never visited me once. Margaret met my eyes. We can prove that. And she did. Hospital logs, visitor records, staff statements. The absence of her presence became evidence in itself. Every day she hadn't shown up, every call she hadn't made, it all formed a pattern just as clear as the financial trail. The first meeting between legal representatives was scheduled 2 weeks later. I didn't attend. Margaret advised against it, and I agreed. I wasn't ready to sit across from Olivia. Not yet, and perhaps not ever. Instead, I stayed in the motel, waiting, thinking, remembering. It was during those quiet hours that the past began to rearrange itself again, but this time without denial. I saw things more clearly now. Not just what Olivia had done recently, but what had been building for years. The small dismissals, the subtle shifts, the way gratitude had slowly been replaced with expectation, and expectation with entitlement. I had ignored it because I wanted to believe in something else. But belief doesn't change reality. Margaret called me that afternoon. "They're willing to settle," she said. That was quick. "What does that mean?" I asked. "It means they know they're in a weak position," she replied. "The evidence is strong. If this goes to court, it won't reflect well on her." I closed my eyes briefly. Not relief. Not satisfaction. Just confirmation. "What are they offering?" I asked. "Full repayment of the withdrawn funds, plus additional compensation," she said. "They also agree to revoke all legal authority immediately and acknowledge that the power of attorney is invalid." I absorbed the words slowly. Money returned. Authority removed. Control restored. "Is that all?" I asked. Margaret paused for a moment. "There's also a confidentiality clause," she added. "They want to avoid public proceedings." Of course they did. Reputation mattered. Appearance mattered. Even now. I stood up and walked slowly to the window, my cane tapping lightly against the floor with each step. Outside, the same parking lot, the same routine movements of strangers going about their lives. "What do you think?" Margaret asked. It was a fair question. Legally, it was a strong offer. Emotionally, it was something else entirely. "If we reject it?" I asked. "We proceed to court," she said. "It will take longer. It will be more public. But you may gain more, not just financially, but in terms of accountability." Accountability. The word lingered. I thought about Olivia standing in that doorway. The way she had looked at me, not with guilt, not with hesitation, but with certainty that what she was doing was justified. Would a courtroom change that? Would a judgment force understanding? Or just deepen resentment? I opened my eyes. "No," I said quietly. "Take the settlement." Margaret didn't question it. "Are you sure?" she asked, but her tone was neutral, not persuasive. "Yes," I said. "I'm not doing this for punishment. I'm doing it to be free." There was a brief silence. Then, "Understood," she said. The agreement was finalized within the week. The money was returned. Every document granting Olivia control over my affairs was nullified. Legally, it was as if none of it had ever existed. But of course, it had. Legal closure doesn't erase personal truth. The day the funds appeared back in my account, I sat at the same table in the motel room and stared at the numbers on my phone. Not in disbelief this time. Not in shock. In recognition. This was no longer about what I had lost. It was about what I now had the ability to choose. I didn't rush. That was the most important part. For years, my decisions had been immediate responses to someone else's needs. Now I allowed myself time. I researched. I considered. I thought about what kind of life I actually wanted, not the one I had adapted to, not the one I had been told was necessary. Mine. A small place. Quiet. Manageable. Somewhere I could move at my own pace without feeling like I was in the way. It took another week before I found it. A small house near the coast. Not grand. Not impressive. But clean, bright, and, most importantly, independent.
No stairs.
Wide doorways. A space I could navigate without struggle. When I stood inside it for the first time, leaning lightly on my cane, I felt something unfamiliar. Not excitement, not even happiness. Something steadier. Ownership.
I'll take it, I said. No hesitaschen. No canceltaschen. No permission.
The purchase was simple.
Direct.
Final. When I signed the papers, my hand trembled slightly, not from weakness, but from the weight of what it meant. This was mine. Completely. No shared control. No expectations attached. No one waiting to benefit from it. Just me. The move itself was quiet. I didn't have much to bring, just the things that had been thrown onto that sidewalk, now carefully repacked and chosen with intention. Some items I left behind. Not because they weren't useful, but because they belonged to a version of my life I was no longer carrying with me. The first night in the house, I didn't turn on the television. I didn't call anyone. I didn't fill the silence. I sat in a chair by the window and listened to the sound of the ocean in the distance.
It was steady, constant,
unconcerned with anything but its own rhythm. I rested my hands in my lap and let the quiet settle around me. For the first time in decades, no one needed anything from me. No one was waiting. No one was expecting. And in that absence, I didn't feel empty. I felt present. It had been 6 weeks since I moved into the house by the coast, and by then, the quiet had stopped feeling unfamiliar. It had become something else entirely, something I protected, something I chose. My days had settled into a rhythm that belonged only to me. I woke when I was ready, not when someone needed breakfast or help finding a missing shoe. I made coffee slowly, standing at my own kitchen counter, watching the light stretch across the floor as the morning grew. Even the simplest actions carried a sense of ownership I had never noticed before. Nothing here was done out of obligation. Every movement, every decision existed because I allowed it. My body was improving, slowly but steadily. The cane was still necessary, but I relied on it less inside the house. I had installed support rails where I needed them, adjusted the space to fit me instead of forcing myself to fit the space. It was a small difference in appearance, but a profound difference in experience. I was no longer adapting to survive. I was shaping my environment to live. I had also learned something unexpected about solitude. It wasn't loneliness. Not the kind I had felt in the hospital, waiting for footsteps that never came. This was different. This was chosen. There is a kind of silence that empties you, and there is a kind that restores you. I hadn't known the difference before. Now I did. I spent time reading again, something I had abandoned years ago without even realizing it. I cooked simple meals, not out of necessity, but because I wanted to. I even began taking short walks along the path near the water. Each step was careful, deliberate, but each one felt like a quiet victory. No one rushed me. No one watched impatiently. No one sighed or corrected or commented. I existed without being evaluated. That, more than anything, was new. It was on a Thursday morning, just after I had finished my coffee, that I heard the sound of a car pulling into the driveway. I didn't need to look to know who it was. Some things settle into your awareness without effort. I had been expecting this moment, though I hadn't known when it would come. I stood up slowly, steadying myself before walking to the door. My hand rested briefly on the handle before I opened it, not out of hesitation, but out of recognition. This was not the same person opening a door as before. When I stepped outside, she was already there. Olivia stood near the car, but she didn't approach immediately. That alone told me something had changed. She wasn't standing with the same certainty she had shown that day on the sidewalk. Her posture was different, less rigid, less controlled. "Mom," she said. I noticed the hesitation in her voice. Not fear. Not exactly. But uncertainty. "Olivia," I replied. I didn't step aside to invite her in. Not yet. For a moment, we just stood there, facing each other, the distance between us filled with everything that had happened and everything that had finally been seen. I didn't know if you'd be here, she said. I live here, I answered calmly. She nodded, glancing past me briefly, taking in the house, the quiet surroundings, the absence of everything she had once been able to control. It's nice, she said. Yes, I replied. It is. There was a pause. Then she took a small step forward. Can we talk? I considered the question, not because I didn't know the answer, but because I understood something now that I hadn't before. Access is a choice. It isn't owed. It isn't automatic. After a moment, I stepped aside. You can come in, I said. She entered slowly, her eyes moving across the room. The space was simple.
Clean.
Intentional. There were no excess things, no clutter, no signs of a life built around accommodating others. Just what I needed, what I had chosen. She sat down on the couch, but not comfortably. Not the way she used to, as if the space belonged to her. Now, she perched on the edge, her hands clasped together. I remained standing for a moment before taking my seat across from her. What do you want to talk about? I asked.
Direct.
Clear. She swallowed, then looked at me. I made a mistake, she said. The words came quickly. Too quickly. I waited. Silence has a way of revealing what words try to hide. It was everything happening at once, she continued. The kids, the house, your situation, I didn't handle it well. Didn't handle it well. I repeated the phrase in my mind. It was carefully chosen. Carefully softened. You took control of my finances without my consent, I said evenly. You attempted to have me declared incompetent. You removed me from your home and left my belongings outside. Which part of that are you referring to? She flinched. Not dramatically, but enough. I didn't think it would go that far, she said. I held her gaze, but it did. Another pause. She looked down at her hands. Everything's falling apart, she said quietly. Derek and I are separating. His family found out about everything. They don't want anything to do with me now. I listened, not as a mother, as a person hearing information. I'm trying to fix things, she added. I really am. I leaned back slightly, letting her words settle without interruption. And how does that involve me? I asked. She looked up again, and this time there was something more visible in her expression.
Need.
I can't keep the house, she said. I can't manage everything on my own. I thought maybe we could help each other again. Like before. Like before. The phrase almost made me smile. Not out of humor. Out of clarity. Before, I said slowly, I provided childcare, financial support, and daily assistance. In return, I was tolerated as long as I remained useful. That's not fair, she said quickly. It's accurate, I replied. She shook her head, frustration beginning to surface. You're twisting things. No, I said calmly. I'm seeing them clearly. Silence returned, heavier this time. She stood up, pacing slightly, the way she used to when she was trying to regain control of a situation. I'm still your daughter, she said. Doesn't that mean anything? I looked at her, really looked, at the person she was now, not the child I remembered. It means you are someone I once sacrificed everything for, I said. It does not mean I will continue to do so. Her expression shifted, from frustration to something sharper. So that's it, she asked. You're just going to abandon me? The word hung in the air. Abandon. I let it sit there for a moment before responding. I didn't leave you on a sidewalk, I said quietly. The room fell completely silent. She opened her mouth to respond, but no words came, because there weren't any. After a moment, I stood up. This isn't a negotiation, I continued. I'm not angry anymore. I'm not trying to punish you. But I'm also not going back to a life where I disappear so you can function. Her shoulders dropped slightly. For the first time, she looked unsure of what to do next. What happens now? She asked. I walked toward the door and opened it. That depends on you, I said. If you want a relationship with me, it will be built on respect. Not need, not convenience. Respect. She hesitated, then walked toward the door. Before stepping outside, she turned back. I do love you, she said. I met her gaze. Then learn what that means, I replied. She didn't respond. She left. The sound of her car faded slowly until it disappeared completely. I closed the door and stood there for a moment, letting the silence return. But it wasn't the same silence as before. It wasn't filled with absence. It was filled with certainty. I walked back to my chair by the window and sat down, looking out toward the water in the distance. The waves moved steadily, unchanged, unconcerned with anything but their own rhythm. I rested my hands in my lap. I was still 67, still healing, still alone. But none of those things felt like loss anymore. They felt like truth. And, for the first time in my life, truth felt enough.